We find out first, why are you smoking? Like we don't say like you're bad for smoking or this is wrong, don't do it. Let's find out why you're doing this. Let's find out what you're getting from it. And then we're trying to figure out and teach them. And that's our next piece, is teaching them other healthy alternatives to cope with the problems that they're using the marijuana to mask.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Different Leaf. I'm Brit Smith, thankful this year for my Thanksgiving leftovers because now I don't have to worry about munchies for a whole week. This episode, we're going to talk about teenagers and marijuana. If you're anything like me, your first experience with weed was in high school. I was 14. I'm sorry, Mum. And like most teenagers who tried it before it was legal, we had infrequent access to some pretty crappy low-grade bud. But teenagers today are growing up in a very different world. There are legal marijuana shops in dozens of states, and the illicit market, where most of them get their pot, is nothing like what any of us over the age of 30 ever had to try as a teenager. Today, teens who want to try weed can get much higher potency flower than we ever had. They don't have to try and hide the smell of skunk streaming from their mum's kitchen window because they tried to make their own brownies. They can buy ready-made brownies or infused gummies, or they can dab high THC concentrates, or they can even drop some sublingual tincture without anyone knowing. This episode, we're going to talk about how marijuana impacts young brains and young lives, how teenagers can make good choices in the era of legal weed, and how parents can talk to their kids about cannabis. My guests this week are from an organization called the Charlestown Coalition, which supports teens in central Boston going through drug and alcohol recovery. Director Sarah Coughlin and Youth Prevention Coordinator Mswati Hanks work with local teenagers who are trying to curb problematic marijuana use. Hi, thanks so much for joining me, Mswati and Sarah. How are you both?
Good. Thank you for having us.
Great. Happy to be here.
So can you just give me, Sarah, maybe a bit of a rundown on what the Charlestown Coalition does?
Sure. We're a community-based organization that is geared at addressing social determinants of health. And so our backbone institution is Mass General Hospital Center for Community Health Improvement. And so our work involves assessing the community health needs and helping the community build capacity to address its own health concerns. And part of the work that we do is around addressing schools' needs as it relates to chronic marijuana use. And so we were asked by the school to help them sort of develop plans for alternative to suspensions or helping to look at chronic marijuana use and how we can be more helpful as a community organization.
Mswati, what does your work involve exactly in these schools? Because the youth prevention coordinator, what does that look like?
Right. So, I work within all the middle schools in Charlestown, and we have a life skills program. So we'll talk about, bullying, healthy eating, healthy body image, substance use prevention. And then in the high school, Sarah and I run the alternative to suspension for chronic marijuana users. That's the program we run. And then in turn, I also run our youth program. That's kind of like my main job is I coordinate the youth program called Turn It Around. And we have about 40 members in that program.
So you essentially work with teenagers who would otherwise go through what's widely known in America as the school to prison pipeline. This is not a term that we have in England, I guess, because we don't have that same level of criminalization for teenagers who smoke pot, to be honest. So Sarah, what is the norm for kids caught with drugs here? Is it immediately to go through the legal punishment and suspension from school?
Unfortunately, we've seen disciplinary actions within school leading to a prison pipeline. So we have students that are disproportionately affected by sort of environmental aspects or plagued with poverty and community issues that affect their ability to function in school, and then getting sort of criminalized for those behaviors. So we see a lot of substance use that happens within Boston Public Schools, specifically chronic marijuana use. And prior to any alternative, schools are forced to sort of use a punitive approach to that, or schools have historically used a punitive approach to addressing substance use in the school. And so as we're seeing shifts take place within suburban communities and sort of understanding addiction and the brain science behind it, we have a lot of catching up to do in terms of the district and looking at how are we helping to understand what is actually underlying the use.
Real quick, if I could piggyback on that and just say, part of the school to prison pipeline is it's overwhelmingly Black and brown kids being suspended and expelled at a much higher rate than, their white counterparts or, suburban counterparts, and after these 2-3 suspensions, it just leads to kind of disenfranchisement with school and, dropout rate. And I think all of that contributes to criminality and leading to jail or prison.
So they are looking at data to correlate, when there's failure in schools, it looks like it leads to prison. But are they looking at the root cause of the failure in school, the root cause of the marijuana use?
I mean, we are.
Right. And that's exactly the goal of our program, is to really look at the root causes and really start to see our students as people within the context of the environment in which they live, and looking at addressing those root causes rather than looking at the symptoms of substance use and then punishing the symptoms, is really getting back to sort of recognizing that youth don't repeat a behavior unless it's serving them some sort of purpose. And so really looking at what is that purpose that chronic marijuana use is serving for the kids, and without sort of taking anything away from them, recognizing that there is something that they're finding helpful in this, is really giving them the space to explore what that is. Why are they smoking? What are they gaining from that? What is it that it's helpful for them? Because oftentimes it's a brilliant solution to an otherwise really difficult life circumstances that they're dealing with. And so then once we have a better understanding of that, then we can help them really address the underlying causes before taking something away from them that they're viewing as working or being useful in their life in whatever capacity.
That's such a different way of looking at it than I've ever heard before. Why do you find that most of these kids are turning to marijuana right now?
It's easily accessible. You know what I mean? I think, when you say legal, it has become legalized, but you have to be 21. So it's not legal for them, but it does make it a lot easier to get their hands on it. I think there's lax kind of taboo around it, right? It's not heroin. It's not pills. It's not cocaine. It's cheap. It's easily accessible, But I think, and the main thing is, these are chronic marijuana users. These aren't the kids that are smoking, blunts on the weekend, or, these are kids where marijuana smoking is getting in the way of them performing in school, getting in the way of them coming to school, getting in the way of them coming to school on time. So like Sarah said, the whole thing is, it's not about just say no. It's not about saying like, you're bad for doing this, you're wrong for doing this. A lot of our kids are coming from, gang infested neighborhoods. A lot of them have PTSD, where they're hearing gunshots at night, where they've lost friends to community violence, where they've lost family members to community violence. They are living in homes with extended family, a 3-bedroom apartment with 12 people. You know what I mean? They have no privacy. There's anxiety. So a lot of times they're smoking to, curb these issues. And that's what Sarah was saying. Like, we find out first, why are you smoking? Like, we don't say like, you're bad for smoking or this is wrong, don't do it. Let's find out why you're doing this. Let's find out what you're getting from it. And then we're trying to figure out and teach them. And that's our next piece, is teaching them other healthy alternatives to cope with the problems that they're using the marijuana to mask.
What are some of the other options, the healthier options that you guys discuss with the teenagers?
I think it's really dependent on what it is that they're bringing to us as the reason. So we don't come in with ideas to say, this is here are all the alternatives to smoking, because what we found is we really have to gear it towards what they're looking for in terms of their life, what really giving, especially teenagers who really want autonomy over their own life, is really helping them understand what it is that you are seeking for. What solutions are you finding through marijuana, and how can is there anything in there that's problematic for you? And is there something that could be equally, if not more effective for that? So it would be different for different students. So we may have a student who, previously was getting suspended or having trouble managing their anger. And so they were getting in fights all the time. And so for them, smoking sort of calmed them down, and they were getting into less physical fights. So they maybe have seen it as a benefit in that way. However, now they're, maybe struggling with their academics or not moving forward. And so that approach, or sort of a suggestion of what else to do, is going to look really different than a student that maybe is struggling socially and, is smoking because it's lowering social inhibitions, and they're, finding that it's easier to relate to peers. Anything that they're relying on a substance to do for them, they're not building those muscles for themselves. So if every time they get in a fight with their girlfriend, they're getting high, then they're not able to build that muscle for themselves to tolerate distress, to tolerate rejection, to tolerate frustration. And so the group is really about how do you live your best life, and recognizing what are the things that kind of make life unmanageable for you. And it's a really different approach than what they're used to. They often don't have a space to be able to say, marijuana works for me because, and allowing them to be able to sit and listen and fully understand what it is that this substance is serving in their life. And then based on their individual needs or reasons for smoking, which some don't even know. A lot of the beginning part of our group is really helping them gain insight. Some it's habitual, and I just smoke with my friends or whatever, and don't really understand, well, what is it that is really helpful in that habitual pattern for you. And so a lot is helping them gain insight. And then with the insight, that's how we elicit behavioral changes.
Sarah and Mswati teach the teens coping skills that they can use instead of smoking weed. For example, they suggest listening to music, and the two have put together some playlists for the kids.
We have them pick the songs, and that's what Sarah's talking about. They come up, they're naming these songs, and me and Sarah are looking at each other like, we're trying not to say like we don't know what you're talking about. But so there's songs for like if you're sad, right? So you want to hear something more upbeat. There's songs for when you're happy, and you want to hear that. There's songs for when you just want to chill. And that's, one of the coping things we talk about is, when you're in a certain type of mood, instead of going straight for marijuana, listen to one of these playlists. And we tell them, see if that changes your mood. And so many times they come back and like, you know what, instead of smoking, I listen to the music. And then, an hour later, I'm like, oh, I didn't even need to smoke, and that's how we start seeing the results, little things, and we also use like exercise. So going for a walk, if you're mad at your mom for yelling at you, instead of getting, smoking a joint, take a walk first, do some push-ups, do some jumping jacks, see if you still feel the need to smoke.
That's so interesting that you look at it on this individualistic scale, because each person does use marijuana for a different reason. As adults, I think that we forget that when we call it recreational, it's kind of not that recreational. We're using it, if you're using it recreationally, to relax. It does serve some sort of purpose. It biochemically, it's doing something in every single body. And that doesn't change just because it's in a teenager's body. It still produces those relaxing feelings, those calming feelings. But let's talk about how it's different in a teenager's brain and what it's doing that's different than it would be for an adult.
Totally. And we talk about this a lot in our group, a lot around the developing brain, and recognize that it is very different when you're using with a fully formed adult brain than when you're using with as a developing brain. And some of our kids are as young as 14 in the group and smoking all day, every day. And so we talk to them about the reward and pleasure systems within your brain, and that oftentimes, and we're putting a mood altering substance in that, it's hijacking that reward and pleasure system. So we have a lot of kids that have been smoking for a very long time that say, when I stop smoking, I get irritable. I can't sleep. I can't watch TV. It's not as pleasurable. And so we explain to them why that is, what's happening in their brain, because they're adding all of these extra dopamines into their system, their brain's not producing its own in that same way. And so that when they do stop, and we teach tolerance breaks, and we have a lot of different strategies around sort of a harm reduction approach to chronic use, is to look at how do we rebuild those dopamine systems within the brain to help them kind of kick in